Hello, class. This is your professor, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm here to give you a lecture today about war and its roots, where it comes from. It's an archetypal phenomena, and I want to share with you some of the depth of what we've been going through recently and how it's impacting our world and our life right now. One of the materials that I'm working with is The Roots of War and Terror by Anthony Stevens. Anthony Stevens is a psychiatrist and Jungian analyst who was from Great Britain and understood a lot about war and has studied war intensively and how warriors are developed and where this comes from in the archetypal universal realm. So I'm going to dive in and get you a little bit into that talk, and hopefully we can learn some things about war and terrorism and what the roots of those things are from. The Roots of War and Terror, an Autopsy of the Human Psyche. And this is a seminar in global psychology and archetypal architecture, how the structure of archetypes is impacting currently in our world today. The presenter, that's me, Dr. Brian Lippincott, clinical psychologist and flow neuroscience coach. So let's dive right in. War is not an accident, it's an archetype. And it begins with the illusion of peace. Treaties fail because they rely purely on rationalism, ignoring the deep psychological drives of human nature. It goes way, way back. And it's in our DNA. It's hard baked into our world at this point. The evolutionary imperative. War is an archetypal phenomena. Our warlike propensities evolved as a homeostatic regulator to ensure group survival, distribute resources, and keep populations in check with their environments. That's a super important thing to discuss right now. As Bertolt Brecht said, war always finds a way. One of the most important developments in psychology in the early decades of the 20th century was the hypothesis proposed by Carl Gustav Jung of archetypes functioning as dynamic units of the phylogenetic psyche, or the evolved mind, which Jung misleadingly termed the collective unconscious. Archetypes are conceived as neuropsychic units which evolved through natural selection and which are responsible for determining the behavioral characteristics as well as the emotional cognitive experiences of human beings. As a consequence, archetypes arrive in psychology as a fundamental principle which one might dignify with the authority of a scientific law. I would state it as follows. Whenever a behavioral trait is found to be characteristic of all human communities, irrespective of culture, race, or historical epoch, then it should be considered to be an expression of an innate propensity or archetype. If this law is true, then it follows that warlike and peaceful behavioral patterns are likely to be expressions of a complex of interrelated archetypes. Now, Freud wasn't the only one to talk about this. Freud introduced his theoretical division between life and death instincts in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, which he wrote directly after the end of World War I. He conceived that two instincts as functioning in polar opposites of one another and saw them as continuous with principles of attraction and repulsion, observable in the inanimate world and in the anabolic and catabolic principles fundamental to the process of living organisms. Eros, according to Freud, the life instinct, expresses itself in the acts of bonding, integrating, and creating. Thanatos, the death instinct, in dissolving, disintegrating, and destroying. Freud did not, in fact, use the term Thanatos in his published work, preferring to use the term death instinct and destructive instinct, and occasionally instinct to mastery or will to power, which he borrowed from Friedrich Nietzsche. He asserted that a portion of the destructive instinct could be placed directly in the service of sexuality, which finds expression in sadism. It has therefore become a matter of cosmic significance that we should apply our collective ingenuity to the task of bringing to consciousness these archetypal determinants which prompt us from time to time to abandon peace and embrace the state of war. Why do we have war? Let's talk about that. Okay. Neuro-architecture, bypassing the cold brain. That's the cerebral cortex, the front part of a brain here. The cerebral cortex, that's the cold part of the brain. It's cold, it's logical, it's rational, controls rational thought, personal conscience, moral restraint, and strategy. Now, down here in the amygdala, in the hypothalamic, and the limbic system, is the hot brain, hypothalamus and limbic system, the seat of primitive aggression, major emotions, and the Freudian id. That's down here deep into the circuitry of the brain. The military hack. How do the military use this? Basic training systematically transfers control of aggressive impulses away from the individual's cold brain superego here, giving the collective military hierarchy direct control over the hot brain. When you're in the military, you got to do what the orders say. This is changing as time goes on. We have more women in the military now, but it's still dominated by the masculine archetype. Okay, dear. Pseudospeciation. Let's talk about that. That's an important concept. That's where we turn people into others. The dynamics and mechanics of dehumanization. How do we dehumanize people that we're going to fight against? The inherent biological propensity of mankind or humankind to divide its single species, we're all one species of humans, into distinct territorial, cultural, or political groupings, elevating the group us. We unconsciously view our own group as the only truly human species possessing a monopoly on decency. This is them, degrading the outgroup, them. The enemy is downgraded to subhuman species. This biological loophole bypasses the natural and moral safeguards against killing our own kind. So we have the in-group loyalty. Team spirit and esprit de corps are regarded by all military authorities as the key to creating successful fighting units. Throughout basic training, everything possible is done to promote mutual support and the formation of bonds between immediate peers, the communal living, the denial of privacy, the Spartan accommodation, the perpetual harassment from authority, and the long, grueling hours spent striving, sweating, and suffering within the pervasive context of the section and platoon, all ensure that a powerful sense of in-group loyalty develops through shared hardship and deprivation. It is in order to foster this development as much as prepare troops for the horrors of battle that warrior makers everywhere have seen to it that basic training is always tough and sometimes brutal. Just as essential as the fostering of team spirit is the requirement that this spirit should be placed at the disposal of authority, the bosses, the leaders. This is achieved through the inculcation of discipline and subordination within the group, and to this end, the rituals of the drill square are indispensable. Drill also has a deeper unconscious effect, only dimly understood by the military instructors, for it is instrumental in activating the warrior archetype in the unconscious of recruits. When a group of men move their arm and leg muscles in unison for prolonged periods of time, a primitive and very powerful social bond wells up amongst us that's genetic and universal. This probably results from the fact that the movement of the big muscles in unison rouses echoes of the most primitive level of sociality known to humankind. Perhaps even before our pre-human ancestors could talk, they danced around campfires, rehearsing what they had done in the hunt and what they would do next time. Since hunting and warrior bands have also depended for survival on maintaining obedience and cooperation in the face of great peril, it's hypothesized that natural selection operating through unnumbered generations of history, or thousands of generations, has made those human aptitudes readily available to us, and they continue to lurk near the surface of our unconscious psyche. This is really important for us to think about right now. Yes, and it involved in sports and a lot of different things that go on. Broadly, the same principles apply to training terrorists as to training warriors. If there is a difference, it lies in the strength of the belief system inculcated by the authorities responsible for the training. Whereas warriors are trained for fight, for territory or spoils, terrorists are trained to sacrifice their life to serve some political or religious ideology. For the ideological inspired assassin, giving his life for the cause is felt to be the highest form of heroism, ensuring his name will live in history, his family will be celebrated with honor, and in some instances he will be granted eternal rewards in heaven. For an otherwise disaffected or insignificant youth, the role of the heroic martyr provides instant elevation to a supreme place in the mythology of his people. This is only true, however, if his people support his action. To provide the support, they have to share with him a feeling of collective injustice, grievance, vulnerability, and frustration, and a sense of mission. This is what is going on right now in our world and in our United States and in the world. And how do we deal with this? Okay, how? Collective shadow, the self-fulfilling prophecy. The collective shadow. We us versus them. The collective shadow. The in-group takes its own repressed hostility, treachery, and capacity for evil and casts it entirely onto the out-group. We project all of our shadow onto the out-group. The illusion of superiority, the in-group remains blissfully blind to its own destructive capacities, feeling morally absolute. We feel that we're in the right. The paranoia loop. Because both sides project their shadows, each views the other's defensive maneuvers as absolute confirmation of hostile intent, a deadly self-fulfilling prophecy. So, we can't think, they're defending themselves because they're protecting themselves just like we would. We can't do that. We have to project all the negativity on them in order to have a war. And that's part of what's going on in our world right now on both sides, on all different types of sides. The monopoly of goodness. That sounds dangerous. The monopoly of goodness. Projecting the shadow creates an enemy at the gates. This external threat is biologically required to forge intense internal cohesion and loyalty and discipline. Classified, warning, ideological contamination, top secret, danger, psychological warfare material. Here we have our equal and our symbols of America. The righteous imperative. America's national symbols have historically been leveraged to metabolize the masses, framing military actions not as political strategy, but as a pure crusade against an archetype of absolute evil. And that's why we're worried about the bomb, and we can't allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, that kind of thing, because we're projecting on them the shadow. And we need to think about that and really evaluate that. That's why I'm giving this lecture. Evaluating and elevating national symbols. Elevating. We raise them to a higher standard. Citizens become profoundly attached to idealized symbols. Homeland, faith, freedom, the flag. Okay, forging the weapon. The archetype of male bonding. And we're using a masculine representation here, even though nowadays we do have more women in the military, and some of our best fighter pilots are women now, but they still are acting this masculine archetype. So, panel 1, individuality. Panel 2, conformity. We make people conform. You look at, they all look different. Long hair, short hair, beards, mustaches. This guy here looks like he's from the 70s though, but not now. But they're all going to look like this afterwards. Synchronization. We make them use their large muscles together in a group, and that develops into the weapon. The warrior, the archetype of the warrior has to be triggered, just like when I first saw my baby boy, my oldest son. I saw his head come out of his mother and I fell in love. That's the archetype of the childness drew the father out of me. The warrior is drawn out through this map that we have on how to create warriors. Forging the weapon. Male bonding is an archetypal disposition actively exploited by senior males. The drill instructors activate this archetype by going through these 4 steps. Physical synchrony, moving in unison through drills, evokes primitive, powerful social bonds. Harshness and cohesion. Extreme shared trauma bonding in the military is very important. It forces the unit to permanently fuse together and creates combat solidarity. Looking after your mates becomes the biological imperative. Fighting as a single organism, as one. We're fused together. We develop a participation mystique. We're in flow together. We all one. We believe we're a team of Avengers going to save the world. That has to be created for us to do some of the terrible things you've got to do in war. Activating the warrior, a 4-level program. It's cognitive, instilling tactical skills, obedience, extreme obedience without questioning, and psychological endurance to survive. Number 2, social. Eradicating the civilian identity, erasing it. We're no longer civilians, we're warriors, completely adopting the rigid universal role of the soldier. Emotional, plunging recruits into intense manufactured stress to forge unbreakable bonds of solidarity. Trauma bonding. Neuropsychic, releasing aggressive impulses from personal conscience so we don't have to, you can kill the enemy. That we have to let go of our conscience and the consciousness of being a team together against the shadow that we're projecting is where this comes from. And releasing aggressive impulse from so we don't have to worry about killing other people or hurting other people or who might be hit by the bomb when we drop it, that kind of thing. Transferring absolute control to military authority. When we're ordered to do something, we do it. And that has to mean that we have to go through extreme training, and that warrior archetype has to be constructed and brought out. It has to be triggered. The archetypal crucible, death, transition, and rebirth. We start off as civilians, attached to the maternal world. They're civilians. They love their mothers. They love their family. That's where we start. First, we have a symbolic death when they go into basic training. The recruit symbolically dies. Softness and the feminine anima are deeply repressed, and for men and women that are in the military. The crucible, we're put through into this alchemical vessel where we're heated up to intense heat and exhaustion and disorientation, throw the personality to a melting pot, literally rendering it programmable. They break it down to build you up. On the macro level, war is the ultimate archetype of societal death and rebirth, destroying the old order to consecrate the new. We got to blow it up to find something better and protect ourselves and who we are and our family, and us versus them. And they're not human because we have to change them into not human in order to have a war against them. Rebirth. The initiate, the warrior, the soldier, is ritually brought back to life, fully identified with a new military self-image. Once you become a Marine, you're always a Marine. Simplify that. We have to lose our old identity to get this new identity. And the harsher and harder the trial to get in, the more we're going to believe in it. The holy martyr. Terrorism is a form of basic war, utilizing the exact same archetypal mechanisms of male bonding and extreme shadow projection. That's how martyrs are created. Sacramental psychology. Fanaticism elevates violence from murder to a sacred religious duty. It's not murder, it's sacred religious duty. Overcoming the ultimate psychological barriers to killing. The Millenarian phenomena, a historical archetype where the self-sacrificial martyr becomes the destructive, believes their destruction will usher in a utopian era, granting them heroic, immortal status and immediate ascent into paradise. Let's talk about where that comes Historical and contemporary Millenarian movements span thousands of years, transferring across religious, political, and indigenous concepts. The Taiping Rebellion, led by Hyung Xuan, who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus, he sought to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish the heavenly kingdom of great peace, resulting in massive civil war. In Native American spirituality in the 1890s, the Ghost Dance movement, a Native American rebellious movement founded by the northern prophet Wakova of the Native American tribe, the Puete, who prophesied the proper practice of the dance would defeat wide expansion, bringing back the buffalo and restore ancestral lands. The Millerites, followers of William Miller, an American preacher who calculated that Christ would return in 1844. When he did not, that was known as great disappointment, and the movement fractured and laid the foundation for Seventh-day Adventists. Moves on to contemporary time. Heaven's Gate. You might have heard about that. It was in my lifetime, but some of you might not have heard of it. Heaven's Gate is in 1997 is a UFO-based Millenarian group led by Marshall Applewhite. Members believe the Earth was about to be recycled and that their souls needed to ascend to an alien spaceship following the Hip-Bop comet. The Branch Davidians in 1993, an apocalyptic sect led by David Koresh. They stockpiled weapons at their compound in Waco, Texas, believing they were destined to fight the final biblical war against the forces of the United States government. Some people have talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses being a Millenarian movement, a highly structured, ongoing global denomination originating in the late 19th century. They hold an active, ongoing Millenarian belief that the current world system will soon be destroyed at Armageddon, followed by Christ's paradise and kingdom on earth. And so we don't want to judge any other religions, but we want to understand how these things happen and how they develop and how they have been around for thousands of years, actually. The digital battlefield. Cyber war versus an abstract enemies. Cyber war, you don't see the other person, you don't feel them. It's not like these guys here. You're going to feel the blood. You're going to look in the other person's eyes. Cyber hackers, you're just a number to them. The prisoner, I'm the man, not the number. But eroded restraints. Distance naturally erodes empathy. Bypassing hand-to-hand combat removes biological restraints triggered by witnessing visceral distress. When we dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we didn't feel what they felt. It was at a distance. But now we're even at a greater distance with cyber war, extreme speciation. Cyber enemies are completely unseen, reduced to data points. The enemy becomes a purely abstract concept. And what we're involved in now is a war of symbols. Attacks target digital infrastructure and narratives, digital infrastructure and the narratives of our culture, of whatever culture you're attacking. A direct assault on idealized symbols, triggering primal hostility without firing a shot. Anthropos, a blueprint for global peace. Let's shift a little bit into how we're going to resolve this and what we're going to do. The blueprint for peace. To transcend biology, we must expand the in-group to encompass all of humanity, the whole world. Maybe when the aliens come at Disclosure Day, we'll finally all bond together as humans against the alien. Why do we have to have somebody to fight against? We need to understand. But aliens would cause this, the Anthropos archetype. Jung viewed this archetype as the cosmic individual, our common ancestor. We all come from the same person. That's the ancient Eve that comes. But the Anthropos, the idea that human beings are an archetype and they're one with each other. The argument that the world government would be the only institution capable of stopping both war and terrorism is hard to refute, but it is not easy to see how it could be politically achieved. The patriarchal imperatives compelling people to cling to national sovereignty ensure that they would not voluntarily surrender executive power to a trans-global administration. If history is anything to go by, it can only come about if we're opposed imposed and imperial. And it looks as if it is where America, the single triumphant and unbeatable superpower, is heading right now. Never in history has there been a nation as powerful as the United States, militarily, economically, politically, and pride in the fact has fostered imperial ambitions among Americans' neoconservatives. Instead, the world has been offered undefined spectacle of unimaterialism, and we're going through that really a lot. It's precisely because America is so powerful that its enemies, unable to engage it head on, feel compelled to adopt more surreptitious strategies. For instance, with Osama bin Laden, use of civil aircraft as missiles to destroy the symbols of American economic and political power in 9/11 has been seen by many in the Arab world as brilliantly inspired and legitimate act of war carried out by the weak against the strong. A more attractive prospect than becoming vessels of some great American emperor of the world is that establishing a world government by consensus means, but this would not rule out the use of organized violence between competing factions. For instance, and the reason why we're America being so powerful that they're using secret tactics is going on right now with Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz to shut down and cut off American oil and oil to the West in general. That's using this ways of dealing with us, not by going against us head on, but by neutralizing the divide. The Anthropos inheritively recognizes our shared origin. That's what we need to do. How are we going to get out of this dilemma? We need to realize that we're all human. Neutralizing artificial pseudospeciation. We're not the other. We're all human beings. And overriding ideological intolerance. We can't be so ideologically intolerant. We have to start to learn about and to have dialogue and discourse with people, let's make some real deals, not these deals that we are trying to do right now where we have to control everything. Unus Mundus, the ground, the one world. Unus, unitary, mundus, world in Latin. The ground of empirical being, the biological limit. It's psychologically impossible to feel genuine, intimate loyalty for 6 billion individual people. How do we connect? How do we see ourselves as we're all human beings? Harnessing loyalty. Society must harness our evolutionary capacity for group loyalty by directing it toward a living symbol. That's the Anthropos. There has to be a living symbol where we're all unified. Unus Mundus, the symbolic ground representing the ultimate oneness of all things. Meditating on this and mediating it, but meditating on this shared existence allows it to serve as a powerful psychological guardian of peace. This is our hope here, to have this mandala of wholeness where we realize that we're all human beings, even though we have different sides and different ways of looking at things. The psychological shift to global consciousness. Parochial consciousness needs to be broken out of, and our human self, our human being, our human brain, our human psyche needs to move forward. And number one, shift the vision. Move away from narrow, sectarian, parochial consciousness where we're all divided toward a unified vision of the planet. Make the unconscious conscious. War is driven by unconscious archetypal predispositions. The ultimate solution is deep self-awareness. We got to realize in America and everywhere that if I'm pointing a finger at you, there's 4 fingers, or at least 3 fingers pointing back at me. We have to make our own unconscious conscious and bear the tension of the opposites. We have to deal with this struggle that we might believe different things, but we need to accept each other as being the image of Anthropos, of human being. That's where the term anthropology comes, the study of humans. We need to realize we're all humans. Instead of unconsciously projecting our shadow into adversaries or acting out aggression, we must develop the psychological maturity to hold opposing forces in our own minds. We need to be able to hold in our mind two things at once, or maybe even 50 things at once. We need to expand that ability. How are we going to do that? The grim catalyst. Can we change in time? Time is ticking down. Are we going to end in a nuclear wasteland or not? The grim catalyst. It's grim. It looks dark right now, but we can overcome it if we bring out this little seed here at the bottom. The grim catalyst. The psychological path to peace is clear, but achieving it collectively across transnational and trans-ideological lines is incredibly difficult. We have to be able to bypass that. The external pressure. Humanity historically struggles to rise above the narrow sectarian concerns without being forced by massive external pressures. We need external pressure or we're going to blow ourselves up. Or maybe the aliens will come and we will bond together as humans against the aliens. But again, we're in that same vicious cycle. Why can't we see the aliens as all part of one of the universe? This leads us to a sobering conclusion, which Anthony Stevens talks about in his book, War and Terror. Stevens posits that humanity may only successfully unite under a global consciousness in the wake of an apocalyptic catastrophe that threatens our absolute survival, as we all feel right now. And yes, thank you for listening to this. This is my understanding of war and where war comes from a Jungian point of view. And it's very important that we discuss this and we understand where it comes from. So maybe one by one, we can start making changes and starting to relate to other people. And we can move beyond racism and sexism and all the other isms and move together where we realize we're all the image of one human being. We're human. We're all human. Thank you very much. I hope you understood this lecture and liked it. If you have questions and comments and you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave me a comment below and I will answer all the comments. And if you're in class, you can ask me questions right now. And hopefully we can have a discussion, a dialectic, a dialogue where we talk about the thesis and the antithesis and come up with a synthesis together in order to deal with these problems that we're all facing right now in a worldwide continuum that we're facing at this point in 2026. Thank you very much.